Hello everybody and welcome back to Slow Your Roll. I'm Cody.
And I'm Alex.
And today we are going to be going over the actual core balancing of DC20 monsters by the numbers. Basically the way that's going to work is the target of this whole situation is going to be balancing similar to what you might know from D&D 5e with like a 4-player party. And we'll go through basically some of the things you need to consider in balancing your monsters and even some numbers to try to give you a head start on what to expect from average damage per action point and, you know, the crunchy stuff like that. But anyway, Alex, do you want to get us started on this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of questions surrounding monsters, and we're trying our best to get all of the answers for the damage, the defenses, maybe even a couple of special abilities, and we're going to be assuming a lot of things about this video. So take that with a grain of salt and try to adjust your best with your party. We're going to, in general, target 4-player parties, kind of like D&D does as well. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is defenses when it comes to monsters. When you want to think about how often your monster gets hit, try to think of like a 50% rule. On average, you want your players to be able to hit the monster at least 50% of the time. They're probably going to hit a little bit more than that because of player shenanigans, but in general, you could probably assume that a PD could be around 12 or 14, along with the AD as well, so that would be a 50% rule on average for players to hit. And that's not necessarily taking into consideration different types of modifiers other players can add onto this, so it really does become a little bit higher than 50%. But if you're just thinking about just the defenses, that's a good rule to go with.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know a lot of D&D's balancing is supposed to be around 60 to 65% hitting. But Alex is totally right. With DC20, there's a lot of extra bonuses to rolls, especially just cases of advantage that come up way more often than in D&D. So it'll definitely end up more than a 50% after defenses are balanced. A really simple way to generally balance the defenses of a monster is to really just try to gauge the typical attack bonus that your players are getting, or spell attack bonus, because in DC20 obviously it's the same. So at level 1, you've got a +4, right, to your attacks and spells. So generally you can start with like a 10 and add 4 to get an idea of what their average roll would be. Technically it'd be like 0.5 higher than that, but you get the idea. So a common approach would be just to set the monster's precision defense or area defense to around 10 plus the party's average relevant attack bonus.
Trying to stay consistent with that 50% rule.
Absolutely. For example, if the party's average attack bonus is 4, a defense of 14 would make sense that they would hit about 50% of the time, or likely more because instances of advantage and more bonuses like that. So now that you've got an idea of how that balancing will work for defenses, now you can be a little cheeky with it and maybe put precision defense a little higher and area defense a little lower, or vice versa, whatever fits the flavor of your monster better in that instance. One thing you do want to note though, because of the rule of 5s in DC20, making defenses too low will mean that your players hit easily, which is fine. But the more easily a player hits, the more damage they will actually do kind of exponentially because of the heavy hits and brutals after that. So a monster's HP can go down a lot faster than you might expect if you bring that defense to a little bit too low of a number. Yeah, that's enough talking there. Down to switch now.
Now that we've talked about defenses for a little bit, one more thing to take into consideration is going to be its health. The party's HP collectively could essentially be a benchmark for a singular monster that they're going to be fighting. For something like an especially challenging fight, you might exceed the party's collective HP, and I might even start referencing this as like the HP budget. More HP is going to mean that the monster lasts longer, therefore so does the fight. Try to adjust the monster's HP based on how long you would like the fight to last, and if we were going to look at an example of a level 1 party, an average PC has between 9 and 12 HP, and we're going to times that by 4. Make it around 36 to 48 HP. And with this equation, you can go ahead and think of a big challenging solo monster that's got like 25 to maybe 40 HP. But if they were going to have lower HP, we could add in 4 weaker minions that might have between 9 and 12 HP. Trying our best to stay within this HP budget that we've just set.
Now that we've considered the monster's hit points, let's not forget about the player's hit points, okay? So moving on to damage output in general, let's start with you want to threaten your party, not just outright annihilate them, usually. So monster damage should be high enough to feel threatening for sure and deplete some resources from the players, including their healing abilities even. Because you got to remember, players' maximum HP is actually kind of in a way higher than you think, just because they likely have healing abilities. If you've gotten them some potions throughout the game or whatever, they're gonna have ways to kind of recoup a little bit.
Don't forget about grit.
Yeah, exactly. And grit, perfect example.
That needs to be a t-shirt.
Don't forget about grit. Dude, I'm gonna suggest that. That's a really good idea. So you do want the damage to be threatening, but not so high that it instantly defeats multiple player characters in a single round, especially, unless it's like a really specific threatening boss mechanic or something. But even then, you probably just don't want to tread down there that harshly. And since we're going that route, let's discuss player survivability in general. You do want to consider how much damage an average player character can actually take before being knocked out completely. That isn't to say killed, but knocked out. Because a monster that can knock out a player character in like 2 to 3 hits, that's a pretty significant threat. A monster that can do it in 1 hit is extremely dangerous and should be used sparingly for sure, or have some very visible, clear weaknesses that the players can go after quickly.
Yeah, if they get killed in 1 hit, they probably the kingdom. So when we're taking into consideration damage, how much damage should a monster be able to do? 1 AP could be equivalent to 1 or 2 damage if you think about it in the terms of a player character. Trying our best to match that can be a little bit difficult, especially if you only have 1 monster. This is a really good opportunity to give them certain special abilities for reactions or just more AP to be able to level the playing field with the party. Try your best to balance things like that with damage output and even sometimes action points with the other side, and see how your monsters compare to your players. And you can vary this in several different ways. If it only has 4 AP and you want it to be able to produce 6 damage a turn, it might make 1 strong attack that deals 6 damage, or perhaps it has a multi-attack that does 2 attacks that deal 3 damage. There's lots of different ways that you can vary the damage that your monsters are able to do. And when we're talking about damage, we have to take into consideration that there's 2 different types of defenses. There's precision and area defense. Precision defense should probably be a little bit higher damage on average than area defense, if we're talking about targeting 1 creature. Area defense, however, if you had, let's say, a 3 damage precision attack, then maybe that area defense attack might be 1 or 2 damage, because you're expecting that area effect to affect several different players at the same time, essentially putting the damage higher and higher. So if it matched your precision defense damages, then it could end up being a really OP big attack that happens, and that's not what you were looking for. It was just supposed to be its ranged ability.
Okay, let's move directly on to attack bonus from there. And I know we're going through a lot of these and it's a lot of information kind of fast. So just so you know, at the end of the video, we are going to give like a little recap section that shows every step we're doing. In fact, you might want to check the description down below too. We'll probably end up putting that same recap there if you want to actually like follow along with it technically. But anyway, moving on to attack bonus. So as far as like hitting back goes, right? The monster needs to be able to actually hit the players. So you want to estimate the average precision defense and area defense of the player characters as well. If for some reason you've got a party that's a bunch of tanks and they're all wearing the heaviest armor they can with all the additives that they can to their precision and area defense, you might want to also make sure you're handing them monsters that can hit a little bit harder to those targets. For this concept, You want to do this kind of the same thing we did earlier, but you want to set the monster's attack bonus so it has a reasonable chance. Again, roughly around 50 to 65% of the time, they might hit an average PC. If an average PC has a PD of 13, the monster might need an attack bonus of a +3 or even like a +5 to actually hit consecutively.
And I know it's a lot to consider, but when you think of action points, it's another level of threat that you're able to add to your monster. The fewer amount of action points that it has, the smaller amount of a threat that it becomes. The higher amount of action points that it has, the much greater it becomes as a threat. You could consider a boss monster to have maybe a couple of extra AP or maybe legendary actions in D&D. But when it comes to the standards, it's about 4 AP per player. But if we were just going to look at the standard, it's only 4 AP per turn, and you could try your best to match that for your monster.
Alex did mention the concept of like a legendary action that you might be familiar with from if you're coming from D&D. Basically in DC20, that would look like something really special and more than average that they can do with an amount of action points. Maybe it's just 1 action point, but once per turn, they can do this really cool thing that is very valuable or like very hard hitting or interesting, so maybe do consider, if you can't give your, monster team 16 action points, consider something really cool that they can do once per turn with an action point or 2 to kind of even it up there.
Like with just giving the biggest monster a couple extra action points, that lets it do its like 2 or 3 action point special move.
Exactly. And speaking of the special moves, that'll be kind of the next thing we hit here. So in general, some of these special abilities and resistances and vulnerabilities are the things we're hitting next, adding flavor and challenge. So the way that would work, special abilities make monsters unique, obviously. This could be a really powerful attack, a debuff to the players somehow, a self-heal maybe, or a self-buff even, or even just a unique movement type like teleporting or something interesting like that. A lot of these things are really just going to kind of come with the flavor of the monster, and it's one of the last things you want to consider as far as balancing maybe some of the spots that you think your monster might be weak in. You can use this stuff to kind of bring up the bar a little bit for them.
Definitely. And I would say that all of the things that you just listed were not equal. If you were to increase one of those things, it could be a very big difference compared to another one of those things. Like, let's just say you give it mobility, that's probably a lot more forgiving than giving it extra damage.
Yes, yeah, any kind of self-heal thing too is definitely something you want to scale with the possible like HP pool of the players to kind of like reconsider how much HP it's adding to the monster's pool by doing that. This is all stuff you want to consider kind of last second. It's a little more complex, and like I said, good spot to bridge the gap if there's anything missing in your monster. One of the special things that a monster might have, again, is resistances or vulnerabilities. So if a monster is resistant to common damage types, it will, in a way, effectively have more HP now, even though it doesn't actually. It's just a way to balance that pool.
We end up speculating this could give it a 25 to maybe 33% increase in HP. You might end up giving it slightly more HP to compensate if it doesn't have resistances, or less if it does. It's great flavor to have your lightning mage be able to extra affect the water elemental, and it's a great way to make a tough monster more manageable. So let's go over the things that we've covered today in order to hopefully make it a little bit easier for you to build a monster on your own. Try to think of the concept and role. Is it a solo boss? Part of a group? Maybe a minion or a swarm? Try your best to estimate parties' capabilities, and if you can, get their character sheets to get the real numbers too. Roughly, what are their average HPs, defenses, attack bonuses, and damage outputs? And then set your defenses such as precision defense and area defense. Aim for your party to hit about 50% of the time, and if it's level 1, we can take this into consideration, being 10 plus 4 is going to be a 14 to hit on average. And then when you're assigning the HP, try to base your HP of a singular monster against your party's HP, or a group of monsters against your party's HP as well, taking into consideration how much over or under the HP budget you're allowed is how difficult your encounter may end up being. Then we're going to need to look at the damage output and attack bonuses. How often do you want this monster to be able to hit your party and how hard. And try to decide on whether it's going to be a single target attack or an area attack when taking into consideration how much damage that specific attack is going to do.
And the last half of this guide would be assigning the action points. That one's pretty easy. Start with 4 AP as a baseline to be similar to a player character. But for the whole budget of action points, if you're going up against 4 player characters, that's technically 16 action points in a round for them. So you want to make sure that your monster can hit accordingly to match this, whether it's with damage or just extra health to compensate for multiple rounds of being there to wail on the party, or of course the special abilities too. Speaking of which, towards the end here, you want to go over the special abilities that your monster might have. This is definitely one of the things you want to make sure you're especially cautious with and consider how it will actually turn out after you're done. After that, you'll be considering the resistances and vulnerabilities that your monsters might have. Do they make sense for the monster concept? That one's really important. There's a lot of monsters that you can be intentional about their resistances and vulnerabilities, and it's a nice way to add fake HP kind of to their HP budget. The last couple steps are honestly pretty similar. Just make sure you're actually reviewing and kind of just mentally testing these characters and monsters before it all plays out. Read through the monster's stats. How do you imagine a fight actually going between the party and this monster or group of monsters? Does it seem too easy or too hard? Find the issues that are going to come up before they come up, hopefully. The last point is to actually do that on the table. Go through this method a few times, test it at the table. The truth is, you're only going to be really good at balancing and making monsters after running a bunch of them.
So that's it, everybody. That's our deep dive into monster creation and a lot of things to consider. There's not necessarily a specific number when it comes to monster creation, no matter how much we want there to be. It's really just kind of a process that you're going to have to tweak when trying to create your own monster. But these are the steps to consider when trying to do so. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and until next time, we'll see you all later.
See ya.